Okay, folks. Good evening. Nice to see you all back. So, as I promised, today will be a question and answer session. If you have any questions, don't be shy to ask them. If I can answer, I will. If not, I'll tell you. I'll look it up if necessary, but let's go. My question to you, how was your break? Everyone enjoy their break? Very nice. Good. Okay, here we go. When one redirects the perception, can they know other dimensions? Well, it depends on what you mean by that, but in theory, yes. In theory, that is possible. When you redirect your perception, can you know other dimensions? You can certainly know more about this dimension, in other words, the truth behind it, because there's actually a saying based on a verse actually from it says like this, that God threw truth down to the earth, and there was an argument between it went like this. It was an argument in heaven between kindness and truth, and it's obviously only meant allegorically, but so there's this argument going on, and the argument couldn't really be resolved. So eventually, God took truth and threw it down to the earth, and that ended the argument. Now, what does that mean? So one of the great Hasidic rabbis said, well, what that means is that in order to pick up the truth, you have to bend down. And you have to look downwards and you have to bend down. In other words, humility is what leads you to truth. And once you have humility, then kindness is automatic. So neither of them was incorrect. Neither of them won the argument per se. It's just that the focus changed. If your focus changes, or in Shelley's words, if you redirect your perception in a different way, then can you know other dimensions? Yes. You can know the truth of this dimension. You can know about and even perhaps become familiar with other dimensions. I hope that answers the question. Okay. What does the Zohar say about angels, archangels? What does the connection mean to us? Are some angels more important than others? That's kind of three questions in one. So let's start off with the first thing. What does the Zohar say about angels? A lot. There are lots of sections in the Zohar that talk about angels. One has to understand what angels are. In general, there are various categories, various classes of angels. Let's put it this way. In the majority of angels reside in the world of Yetzirah. There are actually the four main worlds that we talk about are Atzilut, Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya in descending order. Asiya being the lowest one. So there are angels in the world of Asiya. They're called the Ophanim. The Ophanim, which literally translated means wheels. In other words, like they have this cyclical nature to them. So there's angels in the world of Asiya, the cyclical angels, and then most of the angels reside, so to speak, in the world of Yetzirah. The angels in the world of Yetzirah are really derived from the Sfirot of Chesed to Yesod. In other words, the Sfirot which generally are associated with emotional traits. In other words, there are those angels that in the camp of Chesed, of kindness, and then there's those angels in the camp of Gevurah, severity, harshness. And then there's others in the category of Tiferet and so on. In any event, the majority of angels are in that world, in the world of Yetzirah. But there are angels also in the world of Beriah, in the world of Bria. But these angels are called separated intellects, which means that they can't be sensed through the emotions, but they're sort of in a sense more conceptual, if you put it like that. It's not quite the right way to put it, but that's one way of putting it. Now, all of these angels are, in a sense, all of them are messengers. In other words, they have a certain function to do. There's some angels that are just temporary angels that only have one function at a time. And then they have to, angels can't multitask, in other words. Only human beings can multitask. Angels have one mission at a time. Then they return to their world and they're sent on a new mission, possibly. Or they just disappear. They no longer exist. Once the mission is completed, it no longer exists. It's like a self-destructing algorithm, you could put it that way. But there are angels that are permanent angels. Those are called the archangels. There's Michael and Gabriel and Raphael and so on and so forth. These angels are sort of camps of angels in a sense, which have recurring functions. So those are the archangels. What is the connection meaning to us? Well, they're messengers, and some of them are messengers for protection, some of them are messengers for enlightenment, and so on and so forth. Some angels are, yes, more important than others. The angels which only last for one function or one message, obviously less important than the ones that are permanent, part of the structure of creation. There's an interesting story which is told about the Baal Shem Tov and the person who eventually became his successor, whose name was the Maggid Mezrich. Now, the Maggid Mezrich was a very, very great scholar, but he was not of the Hasidic persuasion. He wasn't a follower of the Baal Shem Tov initially. But he was very well versed in all areas of Jewish thought, Torah, Talmud, in other words, scripture, Talmudic law, and Kabbalah. He was an expert in Kabbalah as well. In any event, he had some kind of problem with his legs. He had great difficulty walking, and he would walk with sticks, but he sort of ignored it and just, continued with his teaching and continued with his studying and so on. But his wife kept on, as every good wife does, kept on nagging him, you got to go see the Baal Shem Tov and find out if maybe he can cure you, because the Baal Shem Tov was known to have the power of healing. So he kept on ignoring her until eventually she convinced him, let's put it that way. She convinced him to take the time to spend the journey, to journey to the Baal Shem Tov, and he did. And he arrived there, and he listened to a couple of lectures of the Baal Shem Tov, and he wasn't hugely impressed. He decided, I'll wait another day, I'll see what happens. So he waited another day, and again, he wasn't very impressed. Eventually, after a few days, he decided, well, it's time to leave. He's wasting his time over here. He's going to go back home. Just then, the Baal Shem Tov sent his, I guess you could call it his secretary, to call the Maggid, Rabbi Dovber, and tell him to come in for a private audience. He wanted to speak to him privately. So the Maggid obliged, and he went into the Baal Shem Tov study, and he sat down. And the Baal Shem Tov spoke to him for a little bit, and then the Baal Shem Tov asked the Maggid, they say that you study Kabbalah. Is that correct? He said, yeah, I've learned a few works. In fact, he was actually not just had learned a few works, he was absolutely master of 60 major Kabbalistic works, which he knew by heart. Now think about that. 60 major Kabbalistic works which he knew by heart. The Baal Shem Tov said to him, okay, if that's the case, he took down a volume of, according to some, it was a volume of the Zohar, others say it was an Eitz Chaim. Eitz Chaim is a work that was written by the Arizal. The standard text of modern Kabbalah is the Eitz Chaim. In any event, he took down either the Zohar or, according to others, the Eitz Chaim, and he gave it to Rabbi Dovber, and he said, open it wherever and explain. So Rabbi Dovber opened, according to the first opinion, it was in Parshat Mishpatim, and elsewhere it was, the other side it was a section in Eitz Chaim that deals with the angels. Both of these sections, whichever one it was, deals with the angels. So the Baal Shem Tov said, he read a piece of it, and then the Baal Shem Tov said to him, so explain it. And he explained it according to one of the classic commentaries. The Baal Shem Tov said, yeah, okay, but that's not it. So he said, okay. And he gave another explanation according to another one of the classic commentaries. Again, the Baal Shem Tov said to him, okay, but, you didn't quite get it. So he tried again. And this went on for a while. Eventually, the Maggid sort of got exasperated, or maybe I shouldn't say that because we don't know how he felt inside, but he said to the Baal Shem Tov, okay, why don't you explain it? So the Baal Shem Tov did explain it, and the Maggid said, and at that moment, when the Baal Shem Tov began explaining it, the room filled up with the angels that he was talking about. His study filled up with the angels he was talking about, that the Zohar was talking about. And he said, that's what convinced me to remain and become a disciple of the Baal Shem Tov. Eventually, after the passing of the Baal Shem Tov, for a year, the Baal Shem Tov's son took over the leadership of the Hasidim, but then he handed the mantle over to Rabbi Dovber, to the Maggid, saying that he was the person who would best lead the disciples forward. And so it was. So that's the story about angels. Okay, is that these are parallel to each other? Other dimensions are parallel to each other. They're not just parallel to each other. They occupy the same space, so to speak. Let me give you an analogy for it. Everyone's probably familiar with sound waves, right? We know what sound waves are. As we know, certain animals can hear much higher pitched sounds than human beings. For example, dogs are able to hear much higher pitched sounds than human beings. So if you blow certain whistles, human beings won't hear it, but the dog will hear it. And so on and so forth. It's one of the principles that they use to keep squirrels away. You get this machine that emits very high-pitched sounds that you can't hear, but it annoys the squirrels like crazy. So that's I know that from experience. In any event, so we only hear a certain wavelength of sound. There's a certain range of sound that we can hear. Some hear a little bit higher, some a little bit lower, but in general, there is a limited wavelength of sound which we can hear. Above that and below that, we don't hear. Does it mean that therefore these things don't exist? No, it does not mean they don't exist. They are there at the same time. If a machine or whatever it is, if something is giving out sounds, if something's producing sounds lower than we can hear or higher than we can hear, it's just that we don't perceive them, but they're there. And the same thing is true of light waves, right? There's only a certain narrow band of light waves that we can see. Bees, for example, can see on a much higher. They see ultraviolet, infrared. It's a whole different, the way the world would look to a bee obviously is going to be very different from the way it would look to a human being. Can we therefore say that all that exists is that band, that band of visible light that we can see is all that there is? Of course not. Other bands, higher and lower, exist at the same time. They fill the air at the same time. And we're just not tuned into them. You could put it another way. You might not have your radio turned on right now, but the waves are traveling through the air of the radio. And if your radio was on, your portable radio, let's say, was on, and the antenna was up, you'll be able to pick up the program. Does it mean that when you're not picking up the program, it's not there? No, of course it's there. It's being broadcast, so it's there. So similarly, these things are there, even though we don't. Angels are there, other worlds are there, other planes of reality are there. When I say there, I don't mean they're over there. I mean, they're here. We just don't see them because we're not tuned into them. Interestingly enough, the Talmud in Masechet Brachot, a tractate called Barachot, gives a recipe for if you would like to see what's called shadim. Shadim are basically harmful angels, and it gives a whole recipe of how to see them. I wouldn't suggest you do these things, but there's a recipe over there what you have to do, and then you'll be able to see them. But if you have to accept the consequences of that because they're not good. So in any event, that is the story with angels. Again, Shirley, is it possible to hear colors in one's environment in a different perspective? I'm not sure what you mean by hear colors in a different perspective, but to put it to you like this, at the time that the Torah was given, so there's a discussion again in the Talmud about this, and a discussion in the Zohar as well, and in Hasidic teachings, Kabbalistic teachings, that at the time that the Torah was given, it says that they saw the sounds and they heard the sights, at least according to one explanation. They saw the sounds and they heard the sights. Now, what does that mean? Now, the way it's explained is as follows. Generally, sight and hearing, two different faculties, operate in very different ways. Sight operates in a non-linear fashion. In other words, when you see a scene, you see the whole scene, right? Yes, true, you might focus on a part of it, but you see the whole scene. Whereas with hearing, you have to hear it bit by bit. You have to hear it in sequence, because if it was all at once, it would just be a huge noise, right? It would just be noise. You wouldn't be able to hear anything. Hearing has to be done sequentially. Seeing, you see all at once. So what that expression means, therefore, that they saw the sounds, is that those things that were only normally experienced sequentially, they experienced as an all-at-once thing, and not only as an all-at-once thing, but with the truthfulness of personal direct experience. Because, for example, the laws of witnesses in the Talmud, part of the Talmud deals with, there's certain parts of the Talmud that deal with testimony and witnesses and things like that. A person cannot be a witness by hearsay, that he heard something. He has to have seen it in order to be a witness, right? You have to be able to see it. So seeing is a much more immediate and direct experience than hearing. So what was normally at a distance, things that we don't normally see but only hear about, we're now experienced directly as a direct personal experience. And similarly, those things that were normally seen, in other words, as direct personal experience, were now only experienced at a distance in a sequential fashion. In other words, it is possible, therefore, that I forget what it's called now. There's a certain condition, actually. It's called synesthesia, maybe something like that. Synesthesia could be, I don't know. Everyone wants to look that up or tell me what the word is. Where a person experiences certain things which are normally only heard, experiences them as vision, and visible things as sound. So yes, that can happen, and therefore synesthesia, that's what it's called. Yeah, synesthesia, right. And yes, it can happen. There are people that have the ability to tap into this condition. Usually it's a condition that happens when people are not healthy mentally. In schizophrenia and various other conditions, it can happen. But there are healthy people that can experience sights as sounds, in other words, and sounds as sights. Yes. To hear Kala in your environment, yes. There are people who can experience, for instance, go into a room that's very, very calm, and they'll tell you that a certain color prevails in the room, even though they've got their eyes shut and they can't see it, right? A certain color prevails in that room. Similarly, with places that are very tremendous upheaval, they'll tell you, I experienced that as some kind of color, even though there's no color there, obviously, or experienced it as certain type of certain types of sounds and so on. Yes, these things are definitely possible. Okay, next question. How can knowledge of Kabbalah be practically utilized to reveal the spiritual root of physical, mental, and emotional disease? Well, there's actually a very interesting book that deals with this. It is by Rabbi Yitzhak Ginsburg. Let me see if I can recall the name of the book here. 1 second, let me just... I can give you the website and you can have a look for yourself. Let's see. Media. Let's see if I can find it. Books. English books. Here we go. Okay. Yeah, there's one called The Anatomy of the Soul. Anatomy of the Soul. 1 second, I'm going to post the, I'll post it in a second. I will post the book in a second. There's a book that I just brought out actually on physics, which is pretty interesting. But just hold on a second. Yeah, I think this is the one. Okay, here we go. There's one in Hebrew. I don't know. I haven't. The one in Hebrew, I suppose, is inaccessible to you, but here it is. If you go to these links here, that's one. That's called the Anatomy of the Soul, and then there's one called this. This is the one. Yeah, this is the one. The second one is the one. That's more psychology. Here is healing. The second one, this one over here, Body, Mind, and Soul. That is called, subtitle, Kabbalah of Human Physiology, Disease, and Healing. Very interesting books. I happen to know Rabbi Oh, there you go. Yeah. Thank you, Shelley. That's I should have looked before I looked for them online. Yeah, okay. Now, Rabbi Ginsburg, I know Rabbi Ginsburg very, very well. In fact, when I was Torah Modern Physics, there you are. When I was a student, actually, I used to go and learn with him on a daily basis, actually, when I was a student in yeshiva. He's older than me, about 10, 11 years older than me. And I used to go there every day and learn together with him. And he's a very, very, very fine person, very spiritual person, very insightful, very intelligent, very learned, very very fun person to be with, actually, as well. He's a musician and has a way with words. Good guy. Okay. Good. Hope that answers your question. Let's see here to go through the questions. So if you want to know about the knowledge of Kabbalah in healing, that's one of the books that you could get. There are others, but they're in Hebrew. So I don't know what your Hebrew abilities are, but that's an important start. And it's got lots of references in there as well, I'm sure. What is the difference between the spirit and the soul? Okay, the differences between spirit and soul is just a difference in terminology. Kabbalah has 5 names. There are 5 names for the soul found throughout the Torah and listed in a particular order by Kabbalah. The lowest level of soul, which we would call, I suppose, the living spirit or whatever, in Hebrew, nefesh, is the life force of the body. Then there's the life force of the emotional person. There's the emotional person, which is called ruach. And then there's the intellectual aspect of the soul, which is called neshama. And then there's 2 transcendent aspects of the soul called chaya. And the highest level of the soul, the root of the soul, is called yechida. Yechida from the word oneness, right? It's in unity with God. So, when you'll see in various books, I don't know how precise they are in the usage of these words and if they even know what that necessarily means. So it depends on the context, which level of the soul you're talking about. All of them could be referred to as spirit. All of them could be referred to as soul. Depends. Now, how many times have you reincarnated? How many times have I? Well, that's kind of a leading question, you might say. Let me put it to you this way. The vast majority of people in our generations, in other words, in these, not just right now, but in the last 100 years probably, are reincarnated souls. There are very few of what are called neshamot chadashot, new souls. Now, what's a new soul? Well, there's 2 types of new souls. One type of new soul was part of Adam before he committed the sin and fled from him before he actually committed that sin. That's one type of new soul. Then there's other types of new soul that were never even part of Adam at all. They weren't part of Adam at all. Those are the real new souls. Now, who are they, for example? Well, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, the author of the Tanya, was the new type of soul that was never part of Adam at all. And how do we know that? Because the Baal Shem Tov said so. So, there are very few of those types of souls, new souls. Meaning to say that every other type of soul is not a new soul, it's an old soul, which means that if it's living in this world now, it's a reincarnation of one sort or another. Now, there is a limit to the number of reincarnations that a soul goes through. It's not like you find in various Hindu beliefs and things like that, where the soul just keeps on reincarnating time after time after time. The soul only reincarnates a specific number of times. And after that, it doesn't reincarnate any longer. It has to get other ways of purification. What is the purpose of reincarnation? It's to give the person an opportunity to fulfill all of the mitzvot, all of the commandments of the Torah. These are all those commandments which can be performed in his time. For instance, we don't have the temple now, so many of the commandments can't be fulfilled as a result. We don't have the temple in Jerusalem, and we can't fulfill those commandments. But those that we can fulfill now, we ought to be fulfilling. And once a person has perfected and fulfilled all of them, there's no longer any need for his soul to be down here on earth. But only a certain amount of opportunities are given, and once those opportunities are used up, then it's unlikely that the soul will be reincarnated again. It's not impossible, but it's unlikely. How many times have you been reincarnated? I don't know. What happens step by step when a person dies? What happens step by step when a person dies? So when a person dies, what dies is simply the life force of the body. The other levels of soul do not die. Now, there's somewhat of a disagreement, it seems, about the second level of soul, whether it partially dies or whether it does die, whether it doesn't die. But nevertheless, the part that everybody agrees with that does die is the life force of the body. But the other aspects of the soul are immutable and do not experience, they don't die. They don't go through the process of death. However, when a person dies, so his consciousness, if his consciousness is simply consciousness of the body and the consciousness of the person's senses that he used in this world, then the experience of death is obviously a very wrenching experience. Why? Because the person had no contact with these higher levels of being, with these higher levels of soul. But someone who does have a higher contact with the higher levels of soul, so the experience of death is a much less wrenching one, and could in fact even be a, as the sages say again in the Talmud, it's like pulling a hair out of a glass of milk. In other words, there's no friction really. Very, very little friction. Right? Pulling a hair out of a glass of milk is not exactly a difficult thing to do, right? It's there's no friction involved. So for certain people, holy people, the transition from this world to the next world is not a difficult one. For the majority of people, it's not easy. But it's a process of cleansing and therefore nothing to worry about. I hope that answers the question. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. That's it. Any other questions? Okay, so I have a question while you're all thinking. My question is how we should proceed with these classes. Should we study a text or should we continue with the way we've been doing things? I'll choose a topic and then we continue like that. We could do either. Both are possibilities. But think about it and let me know your opinions. You can always write to me, email me, and let me know what you think. Good. All right. Any other questions? Other one is fine, says Shelley. Okay. All right, you're welcome, Terry. What text selections? So the text could be Zohar. It could be other Kabbalistic texts. It could be Zohar. By the way, someone mentioned to me that Daniel Matt is giving class in the Zohar. He actually invited me to them. I politely, just told him much success. I wished him much success, but I'm not going to go to the classes, and I'll tell you why. Does everybody know who Daniel Matt is, by the way? So Daniel Matt is a professor of Jewish thought, I believe. I think he's at Brandeis University, if I'm not mistaken, but he translated the Zohar into English. He just finished it not long ago. He translated the Zohar into English. And I'm sure he can read it, and I'm sure he understands it, and he's giving classes in it now. But here's the big but. Academics, it's not always true, but it's often true that academics might know the material, but if you don't believe in it, you don't hold it to be holy, and you don't hold it in the esteem that it deserves, and there's very little that shines through. You might understand the words, you might understand the concepts, but you don't get to the core, because the teacher himself doesn't believe in the core, himself or herself for that matter. So it's possible for me to teach the Zohar. It's possible to teach, some people say here, my birth, my Zohar, and my translation. It's only one volume, and it's only the first few sections of the Torah from Genesis. So we'd be pretty limited in what we could do, but that is a possibility. On the other hand, I think a better possibility is for me to take a little section of the Zohar, translate it for you, and then explain it. That would probably be more worthwhile. So we could do that. Shelley, I want to tell you the truth. He is probably a scholarly person. I mean, I don't really know his credentials. As I said, I think he got his PhD at Brandeis. But I'm not particularly impressed by a lot of PhDs. Now, I hope anyone over here who is a PhD is not offended by that. I think PhD in mathematics is certainly a good thing. PhD in engineering, and there's certain areas where obviously a PhD is a very good thing. But what PhDs tend to do, unfortunately, at least in American universities, is find themselves a corner of some idea, of some subject, and a corner that no one else has ever examined before. And this becomes their corner, where they're sort of the king of the corner, if you know what I mean. They're the king of that. No one can really discuss it or argue with them, because no one has ever studied that particular thing or been interested in it before, and therefore they become, the king of the jungle in that particular area. But they might know very little about other areas. When I first translated and published that section of the Zohar, so I got a letter. It was a letter or an email, I don't remember, from the head of the department of Jewish studies, of mystical Jewish studies at Princeton University. A woman. Obviously a very intelligent woman, probably a very well-versed in her section of whatever it is that she'd studied. It might be Jewish thought rather than Kabbalah, but in any event. So she asked me a question about something in the Zohar, and I understood from the way she asked the question that she really did not understand very much at all. I mean, I answered her the question. It wasn't like I was, trying not to answer her. I answered, but the answer was like so obvious. If you'd ever learned any other sections of the Zohar, or if you were versed in the Torah at all, I think you could answer that question fairly easily. And here was a professor who might have been the world expert in her little corner of of whatever it was, but knew nothing about the bigger picture, about the general picture. And that's not, to my mind, that's not really knowledge. Depth of knowledge in one tiny corner is not knowledge. It's knowledge which is divorced from all other knowledge. So what's the point? Terry, I have a doctor and I can tell you that Starbucks tastes the same before and after. Exactly. That's a very good way of putting it. Exactly. Right. Okay. Very good. Okay. So, dog-collared men of letters. That's what the little Sika Pentwell calls them. Yeah. Yeah. Men of letters. They got a lot of letters after their names, but they're not necessarily very smart people in other areas of life. In other words, see, the more knowledge you get, the more broad your understanding should be. It shouldn't be like drilling down and down and down and down until you understand one little thing perfectly, but nothing else. It's not. You need, the corner is not good without the rest of the picture to make it whole. Right? Exactly. That's why I feel. Okay. So, anyone thought of any other questions in the meanwhile, or that's it? Okay, so we'll call it a day, and that is that. Okay, folks, have a good one, and perhaps for next week already, I will prepare a little piece of Zohar, and we'll see how it goes. Okay, all the best then. Bye now. Okay, welcome.